The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez adjusted her scope for the third time in 10 minutes. The weight of her M24 sniper weapon system felt familiar against her shoulder, a comfort she had grown to depend on during her 18 months in country. From her position on the rocky outcrop overlooking the Kunar Valley, she could see for miles in every direction, but today something felt different. The usual chatter from the village below was absent, replaced by an unsettling silence that made her skin crawl. Rodriguez had been stationed on this ridge for 6 days now, part of a forward observation post tasked with monitoring insurgent movement through the mountain passes. The intelligence reports suggested increased Taliban activity in the region, and command wanted eyes on the ground to confirm or deny the threat. What they hadn't expected was for Elena to become the only thing standing between a small American patrol and complete annihilation. Her radio crackled to life, breaking the mountain silence. "Overwatch, this is Ground Team Alpha. We're moving into position for reconnaissance of the village. ETA to target is 15 minutes. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Marcus Chen, a young officer who had arrived in Afghanistan just 3 weeks ago. Elena had seen too many fresh-faced lieutenants come and go, some returning home with stories to tell, others not returning at all. "Copy that, Ground Team Alpha," Elena responded, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her stomach. "I have visual on your approach route. Path looks clear from my position." She tracked their movement through her scope, watching as the 5-man team made their way down the treacherous mountain path. Chen led the group, followed by Sergeant First Class David Torres, Corporal Jake Williams, Specialist Maria Santos, and Private First Class Kevin Murphy. Each soldier moved with practiced precision, their equipment and training evident in every step they took. The team had been tasked with investigating reports of weapons caches hidden in the village of Kalar, a small settlement that had changed hands between government forces and insurgents multiple times over the past year. Intelligence suggested that the Taliban had been using the village as a staging area for attacks on supply convoys traveling the main highway that connected the provincial capital to the forward operating bases scattered throughout the region. Elena swept her scope across the village, looking for any signs of movement or suspicious activity. The buildings appeared abandoned, their mud brick walls showing the scars of previous battles. Windows stood empty like hollow eyes, and doors hung open at odd angles. She had seen similar ghost towns before, places where civilians had fled when the fighting grew too intense. But something about Kalar felt different. There was a deliberate emptiness to it, as if someone had carefully arranged the abandonment. "Overwatch, we're at the village perimeter," Chen's voice came through the radio again. "Beginning systematic search of the structures. Estimate 30 minutes for full sweep." Elena watched through her scope as the team split into 2 elements, with Chen and Torres taking the northern buildings while Williams led Santos and Murphy to search the southern section. The tactical approach was textbook perfect, exactly what they had trained for back at Fort Benning. 20 minutes into the search, Elena noticed movement in the mountains beyond the village. Through her scope, she could see figures moving between the rocks, too distant to make out clearly but definitely human. She counted at least 8 individuals, possibly more, working their way down toward the village from multiple directions. The coordination of their movement suggested military training, not the random wandering of shepherds or travelers. "Ground Team Alpha, be advised I have movement in the hills approximately 800 meters north-northeast of your position," Elena transmitted, her finger moving to the safety of her rifle. "Multiple contacts, possibly 8 to 10 individuals, moving toward the village in what appears to be a coordinated approach." Chen's response came back immediately. "Copy that, Overwatch. We're almost finished here. Found evidence of recent occupation but no weapons cache. Preparing to extract in 5 minutes." Elena could hear the relief in his voice. The young lieutenant was eager to complete his first major patrol without incident, but Elena's experience told her that the approaching figures meant trouble was just beginning. As she continued to observe the movement in the hills, Elena noticed that the figures had stopped their advance and taken up positions in a rough semicircle around the village. They were setting up an ambush, and Ground Team Alpha was walking directly into it. She grabbed her radio with urgency that surprised even her. "Ground Team Alpha, abort extraction immediately. You have multiple hostiles moving into ambush positions around your location. I repeat, abort extraction and find hard cover now. The training kicked in as Elena began calculating ranges and wind conditions. If shooting started, she would need to provide covering fire from her position on the ridge. Overwatch, are you certain about the contacts? Chen asked, and Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We haven't seen any movement down here. The inexperience showed in his response. Elena had learned long ago to trust her spotter's eyes over her own limited field of view when moving through hostile territory. I'm tracking at least 10 armed individuals in overwatch positions around the village. They're setting up fields of fire on your extraction route. You need to find alternative egress or prepare for contact. Elena's voice carried the authority of someone who had been in similar situations before and lived to tell about it. The radio fell silent for a moment before Chin came back on. Roger that, Overwatch. We're moving to the building with the green door for defensible position. Can you maintain eyes on the hostiles? Elena confirmed that she could track most of the enemy positions from her vantage point, but she knew that her single rifle, no matter how accurately placed, would not be enough to suppress a force of that size. Ground Team Alpha, I'm calling for immediate backup, Elena said as she switched to the command frequency. We need air support or rapid reaction force dispatched to our grid immediately. The response from base was not what she wanted to hear. The nearest helicopter gunship was 40 minutes out, and the quick reaction force would need at least an hour to reach their position. In a firefight, 40 minutes might as well be forever. Elena switched back to Chen's frequency and delivered the bad news. Alpha, be advised closest air support is 40 mics out. QRF is 60 minutes minimum. You're going to have to hold position until support arrives. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization that 5 soldiers were about to face overwhelming odds with only their small arms and whatever cover they could find in an abandoned village. Understood, Overwatch, Chen finally responded. We'll make our stand here. Just keep those eyes on the enemy and let us know what they're doing. Elena could hear the fear creeping into the young officer's voice, but there was determination there too. The training would hold, she hoped, long enough for help to arrive. Elena settled into her shooting position and began the methodical process of range estimation and target prioritization. She had 12 rounds in her magazine plus 2 additional magazines in her kit. 36 shots total to help 5 soldiers survive against more than twice their number. The mathematics of the situation were not encouraging, but mathematics had never stopped Elena before. Through her scope, she watched as the hostile forces completed their positioning. They had discipline and patience, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. Elena realized that these were not random insurgents or local farmers pressed into service. This was a coordinated operation by experienced fighters who knew exactly what they were doing. Alpha, the hostiles are in position and holding, Elena reported. I count 12 individuals now, armed with assault rifles and at least 2 crew-served weapons. They're waiting for something, possibly for you to move from cover. The tactical situation was becoming clearer. The enemy wanted to draw the American patrol into open ground where they could be destroyed quickly and completely. What do you recommend, Overwatch? Chen asked. Elena appreciated that the young lieutenant was willing to listen to her experience, even though he technically outranked her. In situations like this, rank mattered less than knowledge and survival instinct. Stay put and let them make the first move, Elena advised. If they want you, they'll have to come into the village to get you. That puts them in my kill zone and gives you better fields of fire from the buildings. The longer we wait, the closer our support gets to the fight. It was solid tactical advice, but Elena knew that patience was often the hardest thing to maintain when adrenaline was pumping and death was stalking through the mountains. The standoff continued for another 10 minutes before Elena saw movement again. 3 of the hostiles were beginning to work their way down toward the village, using the natural cover of rocks and scrub brush to mask their approach. They moved with professional skill, bounding from cover to cover while their teammates provided overwatch from the higher positions. Movement, Alpha. 3 hostiles advancing on your position from the north side. Distance approximately 400 meters and closing. Elena tracked the approaching fighters through her scope, waiting for a clear shot opportunity. At this range, her M24 could easily reach out and touch someone, but she wanted to wait until the tactical situation demanded her intervention. Chen's voice came back tense but controlled. "We have visual on two of them. Williams has a shot from the second-floor window." Elena could see the muzzle of an M4 carbine protruding slightly from one of the building windows. Williams was a good soldier with solid marksmanship skills, but Elena hoped he would wait for the best possible shot before revealing their positions. "Tell Williams to wait," Elena advised. "Let them get closer. The sooner we start shooting, the sooner this becomes a real fight. Every second we delay is another second closer to air support." The tactical calculus was brutal but necessary. Sometimes the best way to win a fight was to postpone it as long as possible. But the enemy had their own timeline, and Elena watched through her scope as the lead fighter raised his hand in a signal to his teammates. Whatever they had been waiting for was over. The attack was about to begin. The first shot shattered the mountain's silence like thunder splitting the sky. Elena watched through her scope as one of the advancing fighters dropped to the ground, Williams having made his decision to engage. The muzzle flash from the second-floor window had given away their position, and immediately the mountainside erupted with return fire as the hidden fighters opened up with everything they had. "Contact! Contact! We are taking effective fire from multiple directions." Chen's voice exploded over the radio as bullets began impacting the mud brick walls around the patrol's position. Elena could see the puffs of dust and debris flying as rounds struck the building, and she knew the team was in serious trouble. Elena shifted her scope to the machine gun position she had identified earlier, where two fighters were setting up what looked like a PKM general-purpose machine gun. That crew-served weapon would tear through the building's walls like they were made of paper. She settled the crosshairs on the gunner's center mass, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil pushed against her shoulder as the 7.62 mm round left the barrel at over 2,000 feet per second. Through the scope, Elena saw the gunner spin and fall as the bullet found its mark. His assistant immediately moved to take over the weapon, but Elena had already worked the bolt and chambered another round. Her second shot dropped the assistant before he could get his hands on the machine gun. "Good shooting, Overwatch." Torres's voice came through the radio. "You just saved our bacon with that machine gun." But Elena knew that eliminating one crew-served weapon was only the beginning. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 other positions, and the volume of fire directed at the patrol's building was increasing by the second. Elena began working systematically through the visible targets, prioritizing those who posed the greatest threat to the patrol. Each shot required careful calculation of range, wind, and target movement. At 600 meters, even a slight miscalculation could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. Her third shot took down a fighter who had been maneuvering to get a clear shot at Williams's window position. "Elena, we've got movement on the south side too," Chen reported. "At least 4 more hostiles trying to flank us through the buildings." Elena pivoted her scope and immediately spotted the flanking force working their way through the abandoned structures. They were using the building walls for concealment, making themselves difficult targets from her elevated position. "I see them," Elena confirmed. "But I don't have clean shots from this angle. You'll need to reposition someone to cover that approach." She watched helplessly as the flanking force continued their movement. Her position on the ridge gave her excellent overwatch of the main approaches, but the angle made it nearly impossible to engage targets moving between the buildings. "Santos, Murphy, get to the back room and set up on those windows," Chen ordered. Elena could hear the stress in his voice as he tried to manage the tactical situation with minimal resources and maximum pressure. "Williams, keep eyes on the north approach. Torres, you're with me covering the main entrance." The sound of gunfire was constant now, a deadly symphony of automatic weapons and semi-automatic rifle fire echoing off the mountain walls. Elena could see brass casings glinting in the sunlight as they flew from the patrol's weapons. The team was putting up a fierce fight, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. Without significant help, it was only a matter of time before their ammunition ran low or the enemy found a way to breach their defensive position. Elena's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from base. Overwatch, this is Base Command. What is your tactical situation? The voice belonged to Colonel Martinez, the forward operating base commander. Elena quickly provided a situation report, describing the number of enemy fighters, their positions, and the patrol's current defensive status. Sir, we need immediate air support or these soldiers are going to be overrun, Elena concluded. I'm engaging targets from my position, but there are too many for one rifle to handle. The colonel's response was not encouraging. The Apache gunship was still 25 minutes out, and weather was causing delays with the Quick Reaction Force helicopter. Continue providing Overwatch support, Sergeant, the colonel ordered. Do whatever you can to keep that patrol alive until reinforcements arrive. Elena acknowledged the order, but privately she wondered if 25 minutes might be 20 minutes too long. Through her scope, Elena saw another group of fighters moving to establish a position with clear fields of fire into the patrol's building. She engaged them with rapid, precise shots, dropping two before the others found cover. Her shot count was climbing, and she was already into her second magazine. At this rate, she would be out of ammunition before help arrived. Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire on the south side, Santos reported. Multiple hostiles in the buildings across the street. We need support. Elena could hear the distinctive sound of an AK-47 firing in fully automatic mode, the rounds impacting dangerously close to the patrol's position. She shifted her scope to the south but couldn't identify specific targets through the maze of walls and windows. Elena made a tactical decision that went against every sniper doctrine she had ever learned. Instead of staying in her concealed position and picking off individual targets, she began engaging any muzzle flash she could see, regardless of whether she could identify the shooter. The goal was no longer precision elimination but suppressive fire to keep the enemy's heads down and buy time for the patrol. Her fourth magazine was half empty when she heard the sound that made her heart skip a beat. The distinctive whine of an incoming RPG round filled the air, followed by a massive explosion that shook the ground even from her position on the ridge. Through her scope, she could see that one corner of the patrol's building had been blown away, leaving a gaping hole in their defensive position. We're hit! We're hit! Murphy's voice screamed over the radio. RPG took out the south wall. Santos is down. Elena could see figures moving in the smoke and debris, but she couldn't tell if they were friendly or hostile. The tactical situation had just become desperate. How bad is Santos? Chen asked, his voice tight with stress and concern for his wounded soldier. Elena watched through her scope as Murphy dragged Santos away from the collapsed wall, both soldiers covered in dust and debris from the explosion. The flanking attack had just become a direct assault. She's conscious but bleeding bad from the leg, Murphy reported. I can patch her up, but we need to get out of here. Elena could see enemy fighters beginning to move toward the breach in the building's wall. If they gained entry to the patrol's position, the fight would be over in seconds. Elena shifted her aim to the approaching fighters and began engaging them as fast as she could work the bolt on her rifle. Her shots were hurried now, not the careful, deliberate marksmanship she preferred, but the tactical situation demanded volume of fire over precision. She managed to drop two of the advancing fighters before the others took cover. Alpha, you have multiple hostiles moving on the breach, Elena reported. I've engaged two, but more are coming. You need to seal that gap or find an alternate position. Through her scope, she could see Torres moving toward the blown-out wall with his M4 carbine, preparing to defend the breach against assault. The next few minutes passed in a blur of muzzle flashes, radio transmissions, and the constant crack of Elena's rifle. She had lost count of her shots and was operating on pure instinct and training. Every time she saw movement that threatened the patrol, she engaged it. Her shoulder ached from the repeated recoil, and her hands were starting to cramp from gripping the rifle so tightly. Overwatch, I can hear helicopter rotors. Williams shouted over the radio. Elena looked up from her scope and listened carefully. In the distance, she could indeed hear the distinctive sound of rotor blades cutting through the thin mountain air. But, was it American air support or enemy reinforcement? In this part of Afghanistan, both possibilities were equally likely. Elena grabbed her binoculars and scanned the horizon until she spotted the aircraft. Relief flooded through her as she identified the angular silhouette of an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter approaching from the southeast. The cavalry was finally arriving, but Elena knew that even with air support, the next few minutes would be critical. Alpha, American Apache inbound from the southeast, Elena transmitted. Estimate 2 minutes to engagement range. Hold your position and mark your location for the pilot. She watched as Chen popped a smoke grenade, sending bright orange smoke billowing up from their building to identify their position to the incoming gunship. But the enemy had seen the approaching helicopter too, and Elena watched through her scope as they began to reposition their forces. Some fighters started moving toward escape routes through the mountains, while others seemed to be preparing for a final assault on the patrol's position. They knew they had limited time before the Apache's 30mm cannon and Hellfire missiles turned the tactical situation completely around. "Elena, they're massing for a final attack," Torres shouted over the radio. "I count at least 6 hostiles moving toward the breach." Elena could see them too, fighters rushing across open ground toward the damaged building. This was their last chance to overrun the American position before air support arrived. Elena's finger found the trigger once more as she prepared for the most important shots of her military career. Elena's world narrowed to the crosshairs of her scope as 6 enemy fighters began their final assault across the open ground toward the patrol's compromised position. Time seemed to slow as her training took over, muscle memory guiding her movements while her conscious mind calculated angles, distances, and target priorities. The lead fighter was carrying what appeared to be an RPG launcher, making him the primary threat that needed to be eliminated first. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as she fired, and through the scope she watched the RPG gunner stumble and fall, his weapon clattering across the rocky ground. Without pause, Elena worked the bolt and acquired her next target, a fighter who was laying down suppressive fire with an AK-47 to cover his teammates' advance. Her second shot caught him center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed behind a low stone wall. "Keep shooting, Elena," Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "They're almost to the building." Elena could hear the intensity of close-quarters battle in the background of his transmission, the sharp cracks of M4 carbines mixing with the deeper bark of Kalashnikov rifles. The remaining 4 fighters had reached the breach in the building's wall and were preparing to assault through the opening. Elena shifted her aim to engage the fighters at the breach, but her angle made clean shots nearly impossible. The collapsed wall created a maze of rubble and debris that provided concealment for the attacking force. She could see muzzle flashes and movement, but identifying specific targets was becoming increasingly difficult as the battle moved into close quarters. "I'm losing visual on the targets at the breach," Elena reported. "They're using the rubble for cover. You're going to have to handle them from inside." The limitation of her sniper position had never been more frustrating. All her training and skill meant nothing if she couldn't get clear shots at the enemy. Inside the building, Torres had positioned himself at the breach with his M4 carbine set to full automatic. Elena could hear the sustained bursts of gunfire as he engaged the attacking fighters at point-blank range. Williams had moved to support him, and together they were pouring everything they had into the gap in the wall. "Contact front. Multiple hostiles in the breach," Torres shouted. Elena could hear the desperation in his voice as the veteran sergeant fought for his life and the lives of his teammates. "I'm running low on ammo." The statement sent a chill through Elena's spine. If the patrol ran out of ammunition before the Apache arrived, they would be completely defenseless. Elena scanned the surrounding area through her scope, looking for any remaining threats that she could engage from her position. She spotted 2 fighters who had circled around to the east side of the building, apparently trying to find another way in while their teammates assaulted the breach. These targets she could handle. Her next shot took down the lead flanker just as he was preparing to throw a grenade through one of the building's windows. The explosive device fell harmlessly to the ground as the fighter collapsed. Elena's follow-up shot caught his partner before he could react, dropping him beside a pile of rubble that had once been someone's home. The sound of the Apache's rotors was growing louder now, and Elena could see the attack helicopter's angular silhouette growing larger against the sky. But she also noticed something else that made her blood run cold. Additional muzzle flashes were visible in the mountains beyond the village, suggesting that enemy reinforcements were arriving just as American air support was getting into position.
Apache 17, this is Overwatch, Elena transmitted on the air support frequency.
I have friendly forces marked with orange smoke in the building with the damaged south wall. Multiple hostiles in and around the village, with additional contacts in the surrounding hills. She needed to ensure the helicopter crew understood the tactical situation before they began engaging targets.
Copy, Overwatch.
This is Apache 17. I have visual on friendly smoke and multiple heat signatures around the village.
Request immediate guidance on priority targets. The pilot's voice was calm and professional, but Elena could hear the urgency underneath.
They all knew that time was running out. Priority targets are the fighters assaulting the breach on the south side of the building, Elena responded. Secondary targets are the positions in the hills to the north and east. Be advised, friendly sniper is on the ridge approximately 1 kilometer southwest of the village. She wanted to make sure the Apache crew knew her location to avoid any tragic mistakes in targeting. Elena watched through her scope as the Apache swept in low over the village, its 30mm cannon beginning to chatter with deadly precision. The pilot had identified the fighters at the breach and was engaging them with controlled bursts that sent dust and debris flying without endangering the patrol inside the building. The psychological effect of the gunship's arrival was immediate and dramatic as enemy fighters began breaking contact and fleeing toward the mountains.
Overwatch, this is Apache 17.
I've engaged targets at the building and am now pursuing fleeing hostiles.
What's the status of your ground team?
Elena could see the helicopter banking around the village, its sensors tracking the retreating fighters who were scrambling for cover in the rocky terrain. Ground team has 1 wounded but is still combat effective, Elena replied. She had been monitoring the patrol's radio frequency and knew that Santos was stable despite her injuries. Enemy forces are withdrawing to the north and east.
Estimate 8 to 10 hostiles still in the area.
Through her scope, Elena could see individual fighters bounding from cover to cover as they tried to escape the Apache's devastating firepower. Inside the building, the immediate threat had passed, but Elena knew the tactical situation was still fluid. Enemy forces were regrouping in the hills, and there was always the possibility of a counterattack once they realized the helicopter couldn't stay on station indefinitely. Apache gunships were powerful but had limited fuel and ammunition, especially when operating at the extreme range of their forward operating base.
Alpha, what's your status? Elena asked over the radio.
She had lost visual contact with the patrol members during the height of the battle and needed to know if they were all accounted for. The radio crackled with static before Chen's voice came through, sounding exhausted but relieved. Overwatch, we're secure for the moment.
Santos is stable, and we've got good defensive positions established. Williams took some shrapnel in the arm, but he's still functional.
Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her.
Against overwhelming odds, the patrol had survived the initial assault, though she knew they weren't out of danger yet.
Elena scanned the surrounding area through her scope, looking for any signs of enemy activity. The Apache was systematically searching the hillsides, engaging fleeting targets as enemy fighters continued their withdrawal. Several secondary explosions indicated that the helicopter had found and destroyed enemy equipment caches, denying the insurgents valuable resources. Overwatch, this is Base Command, Colonel Martinez's voice came over the radio.
Quick Reaction Force is airborne and en route to your position. ETA 15 minutes. What's your ammunition status?
Elena did a quick count of her remaining magazines and realized she was down to her last 10 rounds. The sustained engagement had depleted her ammunition faster than she had anticipated.
Sir, I'm down to 10 rounds remaining, Elena reported.
If the enemy launches another coordinated assault, I'll need resupply or additional sniper support. The reality of her situation was becoming clear. She had performed admirably during the battle, but her effectiveness as an Overwatch asset was severely limited by her dwindling ammunition supply.
Understood, Overwatch. The QRF is bringing additional ammunition and medical supplies.
Hold your position and continue to provide intelligence on enemy movement.
Elena acknowledged the order and settled back into her observation role, scanning the hills for any signs that the enemy was preparing another attack.
Through her scope, she could see the Apache engaging targets in the distance, the flash of rocket impacts visible against the mountainside. The helicopter crew was being thorough in their pursuit of the fleeing fighters, but Elena knew that some would escape to fight another day. That was the nature of counterinsurgency warfare in Afghanistan. Victories were temporary, and the enemy always seemed to have more fighters willing to take up arms.
"Elena, I can see the QRF birds in the distance," Shen reported. "Two Blackhawks approaching from the south."
Elena looked up from her scope and could indeed see two helicopters approaching the village. The quick reaction force would provide security for the patrol's extraction and medical treatment for Santos and Williams.
As the helicopters approached, Elena began to relax for the first time in hours.
The immediate crisis had passed, and soon there would be enough American forces in the area to secure the village and extract the patrol safely. But she also knew that this engagement was just one small part of a much larger conflict that showed no signs of ending anytime soon. The first Blackhawk settled into a landing zone that the Apache had cleared of enemy presence, and Elena watched through her scope as soldiers quickly deployed to establish a security perimeter. The second helicopter remained airborne, providing additional overwatch as medical personnel rushed to treat the wounded patrol members. "Overwatch, this is QRF Ground Commander," a new voice came over the radio. "We're establishing security and preparing for medical evacuation."
"What's your assessment of continued enemy threat in the area?"
Elena provided a detailed report on what she had observed during the battle, including the number of enemy fighters she had engaged and the likely escape routes they had used. "Sir, I estimate 6 to 8 hostiles escaped to the north and northeast," Elena concluded. "They were well-trained and disciplined fighters, probably part of a larger insurgent cell operating in this region.
I recommend extended patrols and aerial reconnaissance to prevent them from re-establishing positions in the area."
The extraction went smoothly, with Santos and Williams being evacuated to the forward operating base for medical treatment while the remaining patrol members provided detailed debriefings to the Quick Reaction Force commander. Elena maintained her overwatch position until all friendly forces had withdrawn from the village, ensuring that no enemy fighters attempted to interfere with the operation. As the last helicopter departed the landing zone, Elena finally allowed herself to think about what had just happened. In the span of less than 2 hours, she had engaged multiple enemy fighters from extreme range, helped save the lives of 5 fellow soldiers, and demonstrated the critical importance of sniper overwatch in modern combat operations. But, more than anything, she had proven to herself that all the training and preparation had been worth it when lives were on the line. Elena remained in her overwatch position for another hour after the last helicopter disappeared over the mountain ridge, her eyes scanning the terrain for any signs of enemy return. The village of Kaler sat silent once again, but now it bore fresh scars from the morning's battle. Bullet holes pocked the mud brick walls, and the building where Ground Team Alpha had made their stand showed the devastating effect of the RPG strike. Smoke still drifted up from several locations where the Apache's rockets had found their targets. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission from base.
"Overwatch, this is base command. You are cleared to return to FOB." "Well done, Sergeant." Elena acknowledged the order and began the methodical process of packing her equipment. Every piece of gear had to be accounted for and properly secured for the trek back down the mountain. As she broke down her rifle and stowed her scope, Elena reflected on the morning's events with the analytical mind of a professional soldier. The enemy had demonstrated impressive tactical coordination and discipline during their attack. Their timing had been nearly perfect, waiting until the patrol was deep in the village before springing their ambush. If not for Elena's elevated position and early warning, Ground Team Alpha would have walked directly into a killing zone with no advance notice of the threat. The thought of what might have happened made Elena's stomach tighten with residual tension. Elena's ammunition count told the story of the engagement better than any after-action report. She had fired 31 rounds from her M24, with 28 confirmed hits on enemy targets. For a sniper, those were exceptional numbers, especially considering the compressed timeframe and high-stress environment of the battle. Most sniper engagements involved careful stalking and patient observation followed by single, precisely placed shots.
This morning had been something entirely different. The descent from the ridge took Elena 40 minutes, following a different route than she had used to reach her position 6 days earlier. Standard operating procedure required varying patrol routes to prevent enemy forces from establishing ambush positions along predictable paths. As she made her way down the treacherous mountain trail, Elena's mind wandered to the wounded soldiers who had been evacuated earlier. Santos had looked pale but determined as the medics loaded her onto the helicopter, and Williams had actually managed a weak smile despite the blood seeping through his field dressing. When Elena finally reached the forward operating base, she was surprised to find Colonel Martinez waiting for her at the entry control point. The base commander rarely met returning patrols personally, and Elena wondered if something had gone wrong with the evacuation or if additional intelligence had emerged about the enemy force they had encountered.
"Sergeant Rodriguez, I want to personally thank you for your actions this morning," Colonel Martinez said as Elena approached.
"The patrol leader's initial reports indicate that your sniper support was the decisive factor in their survival. Without your early warning and suppressive fire, we would likely be planning memorial services instead of debriefings." Elena felt uncomfortable with the praise, as she always did when singled out for recognition. In her mind, she had simply done her job to the best of her ability when circumstances demanded it. The real heroes were the soldiers of Ground Team Alpha who had held their position under intense fire and refused to break even when their defensive position was compromised by enemy rockets. "Sir, I was just doing what any sniper would do in that situation," Elena replied. "The patrol members deserves the real credit for holding their ground against superior numbers." But Colonel Martinez shook his head, indicating that he saw the situation differently. "Sergeant, I've been in the army for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of snipers in action. What you accomplished this morning was exceptional by any standard. Your shot placement under combat stress and your tactical decision-making potentially saved 5 lives."
The colonel paused, studying Elena's face for a moment before continuing. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with V device for valor." Elena was stunned by the announcement.
The Bronze Star was a significant combat decoration, and the V device indicated that it was being awarded specifically for valor in the face of enemy action. She had never expected such recognition for doing what she considered to be her duty as a soldier and a sniper. "Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but those soldiers fought just as hard as I did," Elena protested.
"They deserve medals too."
Colonel Martinez smiled at her response, which seemed to confirm something he had already suspected about her character.
"Don't worry, Sergeant.
Lieutenant Chan and his team are all being recognized for their actions as well. Sergeant Torres is getting a Bronze Star, and the others are receiving Army Commendation medals with V devices. But your actions were particularly noteworthy because you engaged a superior enemy force from an isolated position with no possibility of immediate support."
The debriefing process took most of the afternoon, with intelligence officers asking detailed questions about enemy tactics, equipment, and numbers.
Elena's observations from her elevated position provided valuable information about insurgent operating procedures in the region. The enemy's coordination and discipline suggested they were not local farmers pressed into service, but experienced fighters with military training. The way they coordinated their movement and established interlocking fields of fire indicates professional military background, Elena told the intelligence officers.
These weren't random insurgents. They had a plan and the skills to execute it.
Her assessment matched reports from other areas of operations where experienced foreign fighters had been encountered supporting local insurgent groups. Elena learned during the debriefing that Ground Team Alpha's mission had been more successful than initially realized. Before the attack began, they had discovered evidence of a significant weapons cache operation in the village, including locations where heavy weapons had been stored and transportation routes used to move equipment.
The intelligence gathered would lead to additional operations targeting the insurgent supply network in the region.
Santos and Williams were both stable and receiving treatment at the base medical facility.
Santos's leg wound was serious but not life-threatening, though it would likely require evacuation to Germany for specialized surgery. Williams's shrapnel wounds were superficial and would heal completely with proper care. Both soldiers had specifically asked to thank Elena for her support during the battle.
"Santos wanted me to tell you that your shooting saved her life," the medical officer reported. She said she could see enemy fighters moving toward their position just before you started engaging them. If they had gotten any closer to the building, she might not have survived the evacuation. Elena appreciated the sentiment, but she couldn't shake the feeling that any competent sniper would have done the same thing in her position. That evening, Elena sat in her quarters cleaning her rifle and reflecting on the day's events. The M24 sniper weapon system had performed flawlessly under combat conditions, and Elena felt a renewed appreciation for the weapon that had served her so well. Every component had functioned exactly as designed, from the precision barrel to the reliable bolt-action mechanism. Her roommate, Specialist Jennifer Park, was curious about the battle and peppered Elena with questions about what it felt like to engage multiple enemy targets in rapid succession. Elena found it difficult to put the experience into words. The training had taken over so completely that much of the engagement felt like an elaborate exercise rather than life-or-death combat. It was like everything I trained for suddenly became real, Elena explained. All the range time, all the fieldwork, all the tactical exercises, it all came together in those few minutes. I wasn't really thinking about it being combat. I was just applying my training to solve tactical problems. Park nodded thoughtfully, trying to understand what it would be like to be the only thing standing between fellow soldiers and death. The next morning brought new orders for Elena. She was being temporarily assigned to the base's sniper training program to share her combat experience with newly arrived snipers. The Army had recognized that her recent engagement provided valuable lessons that could benefit other soldiers preparing for similar missions. Elena's first class consisted of 6 newly assigned snipers who had completed their training in the United States but had no combat experience. They hung on every word as she described the tactical situation and the decisions she had made during the engagement. But Elena was careful to emphasize that her actions were not superhuman or exceptional, they were simply the result of proper training applied under pressure. The key is to trust your training and not overthink the situation, Elena told the group. When the shooting started, I didn't have time to second-guess myself. I identified threats, prioritized targets, and engaged them systematically. The training had prepared me for exactly that type of scenario. One of the young snipers asked how she had managed to maintain accuracy while firing so rapidly. Combat accuracy is different from range accuracy, Elena explained. You're not trying to put every shot in the X-ring. You're trying to neutralize threats effectively. A hit anywhere in the center mass will stop an enemy fighter just as effectively as a perfect bullseye. She emphasized the importance of practical marksmanship over theoretical perfection. Elena's reputation spread quickly through the sniper community, and she found herself fielding questions from snipers at other bases who wanted to know about her techniques and experiences. She was surprised to learn that her engagement had been exceptional even by special operations standards. Most sniper encounters involved much smaller numbers of targets over longer time periods. 2 weeks after the battle, Elena received word that her Bronze Star recommendation had been approved at the highest levels. The award ceremony was scheduled for the following month, with several high-ranking officers planning to attend. Elena felt honored by the recognition, but she also felt a responsibility to represent all the snipers who had served in similar situations without receiving public acknowledgement. The intelligence gathered from the Kalar engagement led to a series of successful operations against insurgent supply networks throughout the region. Elena participated in several of these missions, providing overwatch support for raids and reconnaissance operations. Her experience and proven combat effectiveness made her a valuable asset for the most sensitive missions. Lieutenant Chen visited Elena before his rotation back to the United States, thanking her personally for her actions during the ambush. He had been promoted ahead of his peers and was being assigned to train new officers based on his combat experience. The young lieutenant who had seemed so uncertain during the battle had developed into a confident leader who understood the realities of combat operations. I learned more about leadership in those 2 hours than I did in 4 years at West Point, Chen told Elena. Watching you stay calm and focused under pressure showed me what professional competence looks like. I'll carry those lessons with me for the rest of my career. Elena was touched by his words, remembering the nervous young officer who had led his first patrol into an enemy ambush. As Elena's deployment neared its end,
she reflected on how the engagement at Kalar had changed her perspective on her role as a sniper. She had always understood the theoretical importance of precision marksmanship in modern warfare, but experiencing the immediate life-or-death impact of her skills had given her a deeper appreciation for the responsibility that came with the sniper's rifle. Elena's final report on the Kalar engagement would become part of the Army's official lessons learned database, providing future snipers with detailed information about long-range engagement of multiple targets under combat conditions. Her tactical decisions and shooting techniques would be studied and taught for years to come, helping other soldiers prepare for similar challenges. The morning Elena packed her equipment for the journey home, she took one last look at the mountain ridge where she had spent 6 days watching the valley below. The position had given her the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of 5 fellow soldiers, and she knew that experience would stay with her for the rest of her life. As the transport helicopter lifted off, carrying her away from the Afghan mountains, Elena understood that she had not just survived her deployment, she had proven that when the moment demanded it, she was ready to answer the call with deadly precision.